All right, James, we'll let you kick us off.
Okay, awesome. First, we'd just like to welcome everyone to our event tonight. This is, we're really excited to have you join us on this, what is a snowy evening in Chicago, and I hope is warm and welcoming to you wherever you are. I'm James Evans. I am the faculty co-director of MACSS with Mark Berman. He was unable to join us tonight. And I work in computational social science, in sociology, in kind of innovation studies, and in the science of science. We're really excited that this is the first of our MACSS kind of industry and academy panel events that's comprised primarily of MACSS graduates. 6 of our 7 panelists speaking this evening are graduates of the MACSS program, representing a wide variety of career pathways that our graduates can pursue, from data science and private industry to research in the public sector to further studies on the pathway to a PhD. And each of those are kind of like tracing the career histories of those who are joining us. And so I think it's also just really nice to see some of these panelists of ours who it's been a little while, but it's really delightful to see you thriving, and we're so grateful that you're willing to come back and give back to the program and share your experiences with those who are trying to find their way. So we're really eager for what promises, I think, this evening to be a robust discussion about opportunities, trends in the field, and of course, I think one of the most exciting things about this field is that things are changing and opportunities are unfolding, that companies and industries that didn't think that social science or social science inquiry or questions were relevant to them a couple of years ago now realize their importance and relevance in new ways. And so we're really excited to have our panelists who have their fingers on the pulse of these various industries dive in and introduce this to us. So with that, I'll turn our time over to our moderator.
Thanks so much, James, for that lovely welcome. I'm Lauren Sheely, the Employer Relations Manager for the University of Chicago Social Science Master's Programs. I know I've met many of the students on this call, and Shelley and I hope to meet many more of you in the coming months as you consider life after the program and internships in the interim. So welcome again. We're so glad that you've joined us this evening for this career event. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. So our panel discussion and Q&A will last until about 7 p.m. We'll have a 5-minute break for you to grab water, take a quick stretch, do whatever else you need to do. And then at 7:05, we will reconvene for our small group networking sessions with panelists in the alternate Zoom meeting. You should have received a link for that session, but we will also drop it in the chat towards the end of this event. Students will be randomly assigned to breakout rooms and have the chance to have more in-depth conversation with these amazing panelists that we have here today. So for the panel discussion, I'll be asking a series of questions to our panelists, and then we're going to open up the floor to see what kind of questions you have. So you can go ahead and drop your questions in the Q&A portion of the webinar. And you also have the opportunity to upvote a question. So if you see a question that you like, that you're interested in asking, give that an upvote. And that way, Shelley and I will know that it's of interest to multiple students. Shelley is going to moderate the panel. So Shelley, do you want to just give a little quick wave hello? Oh. Shelley Robinson, our Director of Career Services. There she is. She'll be moderating our Q&A this evening. And she's also going to, be facilitating some of this on the back end. And we're with our wonderful team from the webinar team. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'd like to begin by just asking our panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves and speak briefly about their current role in their current organization. And since he's up on my screen, why don't we start with you, Rodrigo?
Okay, I realized that I was in mute. So my name is Rodrigo. I'm a data scientist at Meta, and my main responsibilities are related to understand the internal and external factors that can affect the revenue. I will say that every day I do some kind of SQL, some kind of statistics, and a lot of also intuition from computational social science, especially from economics, that basically help me to understand the different trends and how the users may react to certain changes in the apps.
Thank you. Why don't we go to JY next?
Hi, everybody. I'm JY Sun. I'm the Director of College Analytics and Insights at Noble Schools. Noble Schools is the largest charter school network in the state of Illinois. We have 17 high schools and 1 middle school. We serve about 12,500 students. 98% of our student body is Black, Latinx, and students of color, and 90% come from low-income backgrounds. And so as the Director of College Analytics and Insights, I spend about half of my time doing data management and munging around in the data. And this includes everything from report generation to assessing efficacy of our various programs. And then the other half of my time, I'm basically working on communicating these analytic insights to various audiences, both internal and external, and making recommendations for what we do. So I'm talking to principals, I'm talking to campus college teams, I'm talking with our fundraising team, with our communications team. So it's a pretty wide scope of things that I'm responsible for across our network.
Thank you. Bethany, would you go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Beth Bailey. It's good to be here. I'm currently working as a lead data science product manager at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois, which is, if you don't know, a large health insurance company. And in my current role, I work with our clinical domain and our data scientists to help predict members' risk and clinical outcomes so that we can then use that information to directly engage with and intervene with our members and help them in their healthcare journey. And so what does that mean day to day? As a data science product manager, I wear a lot of different hats. I lead product development from kind of inception to use case scoping and delivery, and then finally maintenance. And this really requires a strong understanding of both business, but also data science, which is a skill set that I'm lucky to have from working in the business world and also getting this degree in MACSS. So my job basically involves lots of meetings, lots of code review, lots of strategic planning discussions, and telling people what data science can and what it cannot do. Lots of telling people what data science cannot do, or trying to work through new use cases. Good to be here.
Thank you. Erin?
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Ochoa, and I'm a PhD student in the sociology department at Northwestern University. We are just north of Chicago in Evanston. I'm also doing the statistics master's program. So it's been a lot of courses that I've spent, the first 3.5 years doing. I'm also a research assistant in the Northwestern Network and Neighborhood Initiative. And we study a lot of urban sociology topics revolving around crime and criminal justice. So most of my work there has been on projects involving violence interruption, street outreach, surveys to measure community feelings about policing, and topics along those lines. We use a lot of different types of methods. So most of my work has been running models, coding up models, running models, interpreting the results, which is, of course, a very important part of any type of data science project. So it's been quite an experience.
Thank you, Erin. Jake, could we go to you next?
Sure. Hi, folks. I'm Jake Bartolone. I'm the Director of Data Science at Peapod Digital Labs here in Chicago. A few of you might remember the name Peapod as a grocery delivery company. Unfortunately, we decided to shut down that part of the business like 6 months before the pandemic started, which hasn't aged very well. But what we do now is we're kind of an incubator for all of the other grocery store brands under our umbrella company. So they're all on the East Coast. So if you're from the East Coast, Stop and Shop, Food Lion, Giant Foods, all of those are our stores. So I have a couple teams at PDL. My main team is in charge of basically any recommendation you see on the grocery store websites. So something is out of stock, we might recommend other things that are similar to it that you might like. And those are all personalized to somebody's order history. So we try to learn if somebody is gluten-free or has other dietary preferences. So we're recommending them the right things. The other team I work with is the team that kind of does all the behind the scenes work, the machine learning engineering, and making it all happen. Because if you imagine, you could have the best model in the world, but if it takes 10 seconds to a minute to return a search result, nobody's going to stick around and wait for it. So we have to really worry about latency and things like that, which that's actually the part I think is really fun now, but I am a data scientist by training. So I dabble in the ML engineering stuff.
Thank you, Jake. Lewison?
Thanks, Lauren. Hello, everyone. My name is Lewison. I'm a research analyst and data steward at the Health Lab. And the Health Lab is kind of a research outfit based out of Harris School as well as the UChicago Medicine. And what we primarily do is we partner with organizations inside and outside of Chicago in evaluating public health programs. These can be say drug rehabilitation programs, or say even like during COVID, during the pandemic, we did a lot of contact tracing as well. My main responsibilities from just across the day-to-day is 50% developing machine learning and statistical models and 50% maintaining data privacy policies and data infrastructure. And I think that's it.
Wonderful. And last, let's go Dhruval.
Hey everybody, I'm Dhruval Putt. I work at Civis Analytics as an applied data scientist, and I didn't start that long ago, about 6 months ago. And Civis Analytics is a Chicago-based startup with its roots in political campaigns. So they did a lot of use data and data science to basically reach out for campaigns and reach out to voters. And since then, it has grown to include public sector, nonprofit projects, as well as commercial projects. So particularly, I'm hired to work within their public sector division. And within that too, they have products where Civis is offers products to particular companies to take it and run with it, or there's consultants, so which is where the applied data scientists come in, where we partner with the clients and figure out what their data needs is and provide services as needed. So in the 6 months I've been here, a lot of work has been in data. Unfortunately, all data, you have to clean it. So a lot of work in data setting up the data pipelines, working on cleaning, transforming, and maintaining those data for a US government initiative. So it's the President's Malaria Initiative. So the government, US government partners with 27 different countries to use data to eliminate some of the, or reduce malaria across these high-risk nations. So we use those data, maintain it, and then I help with some of the dashboard development and other work as client needs.
Thank you so much. And thank you once again for all of you joining us here tonight. We're so excited to get started. So my first question is for Jake, Rodrigo, and JY, and you can kind of jump in any order you'd like. But I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about maybe some key moments within your careers that led to the roles that you are currently in. Anything about your educational background, challenging moments, specific types of training, whatever kind of comes to mind.
I mean, I can start. So I will say that it's difficult to identify a very specific moment, because I think it's a series of decisions and a series of things that actually create the outcome. But just to mention some of them, I remember that at some point, back 2011 or something, when I started to hear about what was the term at that time, big data, I say oh wow, this is so interesting. So I want to learn about that. So basically, that sparkling that I have just to understand what it was. And if I can learn that. So I will say that was the first moment when I realized okay, this maybe it's interesting to me to try to understand this and pursue something like that professionally. Second, I will say that is MACSS. I mean, MACSS for the different components, for the social science component, and also because the coding part. I mean, I think in many industries, and including in my own position, basically they were looking for people with background in understanding economic issues, but also have a lot of coding and SQL and are able to program and understand complex problems. So I will say that if I can identify another moment, I think is that one, and basically the combination of the abilities from economics and coding and programming and computer science. So So I think, that combination is powerful, especially if you are able to basically to use the knowledge from the different disciplines and create a coherent career with that.
Happy to hop in. So a little bit about my background is after undergrad, I was a classroom teacher for a high school teacher for 3 years. I did Teach for America. And then I came to Chicago to do the MACSS program. And then after finishing at MACSS, I worked as a data scientist at a local nonprofit. And we actually partnered with Civis Analytics for a period of time. But I mean, I think when I think back at like some key moments in those like 2 roles that I had previous to the one that I had now is that oftentimes I realized I was in spaces or at tables where I was not in spaces or not at tables where key decisions were being made or where policy was being set. And I wanted to be in those spaces. So I remember being a classroom teacher and I felt that I was teaching to standards or to a principal's school vision that was just handed down to me. And it was my responsibility just to execute that. But I wanted to have a hand in shaping what that culture of our school looked like. Or when I was working as a data scientist at the nonprofit, a lot of what I was doing was, really cool work in like building dashboards, generating reports for other teams at the organization to analyze and take action. But I wasn't there as a partner with them doing that work. And I wanted to have a hand in informing the actions of my colleagues because they were the ones who were going into schools and coaching teachers and coaching our administrative teams. So really when I was like looking for my next role, I knew that I wanted to be in a position or I wanted to be well positioned to navigate my way to have a seat at a table where decisions would be made that would inform the direction of our organization, right? And so now I find myself speaking to principals, 18 principals at 18 school campuses about how they are setting their vision for college outcomes at their campus, right? And that impacts outcomes for our 20,000 plus alumni. I am in meetings with chiefs to make recommendations on why it is that we prioritize immediately matriculating to a 4-year college versus 2-year versus taking a gap year. We know that that gets the best outcomes for our kids. And we know that that impacts, the 2,900 seniors that are about to graduate this spring, still in the middle of a pandemic. So when I think about like things that are different in this particular role that I've been looking for relative to the past, I would say that is the thing that is most salient in my mind.
I think I know I'm the outlier in this panel in terms of educational background, not a MACSS student. I'm a PhD graduate from the University of Chicago in 2004 in cognitive psychology. As you may or may not know, 20 years ago when I was studying, data science wasn't really a term. People didn't really talk about that. It wasn't really its own discipline. And so while I was doing kind of computational work in cognitive psychology and taking computer science classes on the side, that career wasn't really available to me back then. So I jumped into social science survey research. And I had a 15-year career there. And what I found over time was that, I worked for a very old, very traditional company that their solution to solving problems was, let's go out and interview 30,000 people about that. That's great, that's expensive, but there's a lot of data that's just out there. And so, what I figured out over time was that what I was trying to do was data science, but I was having a hard time pushing an 85-year-old company to adapt to data science. So I was never going to win that battle. So I had to leave. And in order to start my career as a data scientist with no experience, I actually quit the job and went and did an in-person boot camp for 12 weeks. After which I then went and got my first job as a data scientist at another Chicago company called Uptake. And I'd spent the last 8 years of my career in my previous company managing and doing things like that. So I always knew that's what I wanted to get back to. But it was really important to me to prove that I could actually be a data scientist first before managing them. Because I didn't want to come in and say, I know how to do this without being able to prove it. So I spent the first about year of my career at Uptake building models for industrial analytics, some really cool stuff before some management positions opened up. And from there, it's just been learning more about different fields that didn't exist back when I was studying that I wish I could have studied 20 years ago.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. My next question is for Dhruval, Beth, and Leosin. I'm wondering if you would share a little bit about your experience transitioning from MACSS into the workplace. Anything about skills that you have found particularly valuable in your new roles, things that have surprised you, challenges that you didn't anticipate. And, are there any skills or competencies in particular that you didn't necessarily know the importance of while you were in the program, but have kind of realized now that you're out in the workforce, oh, wow, this is really kind of critical to my success. And you can feel free to kind of jump in any order you'd like as well.
So I'm happy to take a stab at this, and I'm sure Dhruval and Beth also experienced something similar. Excuse me, but something that I found really useful, and I mean it's not exactly surprising, but slightly surprising still, is that when I first entered the MACSS program, it was as Rodrigo mentioned earlier, like a lot of it was also interest in working with data, interest in this idea of big data and what we can do with it. But actually going into the workforce, and especially with the Health Lab as a nonprofit outfit, there was a lot of presentation skills that I picked up in MACSS through like the seminars and the mock thesis lightning presentations that we did that really helped during my career in the past 2 years. Because a lot of, and I'm speaking, from my role as a research analyst with the Health Lab, but a lot of my job, yes, like half of it is analyzing data, developing dashboards, creating visualizations, building machine learning models, but the other half of it is also negotiating with external partners, with your boss. And in that sense, like even if you have a compelling story in the data, if you can't really tell it, then you're not really sort of getting your point across. So I would say learning how to present data is the thing.
Yeah, and I'll just actually add on to that. I think learning how to present data is not just about you coming and explaining data science or analytics or whatever you're doing to your stakeholders, but also knowing how to ask questions. Like this goes for anything. When you're a student in MACSS, you really learn to ask questions. And I think you should continue to see yourself as a lifelong student so that you can really dig deep into the realms that you're doing whatever your data processing or analytics or data science is for. You're talking to people who have different expertise than you. You should take that expertise and then try to share your expertise while understanding where they're coming from. And then I guess 2 kind of surprising things that I didn't realize would be as important as they are. 1, documentation. That's really key. You do it in MACSS, you should continue to do it, document your code well, put together good readmes, that kind of stuff. When you're sharing work with others and actively working with them, it's so important that people know what you're doing and know how to run your code. And then also, when you're in MACSS, you work with different data sets. Some are nicely cleaned for you, some are not. Get experience data cleaning, get some experience with SQL. If you guys haven't taken a databases course or some course where you use SQL, you should do it. Because if you're going to work in industry, that is a really important skill to have. I finally understand the joke that data science is 80% data cleaning and 20% complaining about data cleaning. It's not quite true, but it's pretty close to true. So just make sure that you have experience if you're going into industry in SQL and data cleaning.
Yeah, definitely resonate with all that great advice like Leosin and Beth shared, because I agree. Some of the things that I know, like MACSS definitely set me up for success was like in terms of critical thinking. My background was from engineering, so doing more like a research and like this combination of social science and data science was new to me. So the technical knowledge to be able to hold a conversation with multidisciplinary audience was fantastic. Even like workshops and stuff where we get to read like these complex papers and learn how to ask good questions. And I know that might not be like super high priority right now for most students, but I honestly think that was like a very important skills, like, to be able to process a lot of new data and like, sorry, not new information in general, and then be able to ask good questions. And then, yeah, that build that critical thinking from a broad question to like individual project management, where you can kind of complete what you're tasked to do. But I do think in the industry, more than the individual project management, also the whole collaboration part comes in very heavily. So I think a lot of my early, like starting out learning was like, how do I communicate best with others as I work with them, right? So using tools like, and again, in remote only work, it's also difficult because you're actually mostly working through chat and like getting to know, setting the right meetings. Some of that is it takes a little bit of learning. So you're best communicating with your coworkers to get the details we need, at the same time sharing what you've done. And I couldn't agree more with like best documentation. Like even if you use Git, like write the right comments, it comes in handy for you to look at it again. But at the same time, again, when you do collaborative work, others can like review your code better, understand what you're trying to do. And that definitely comes in handy. So I think before prepping for like workplace, thinking about what are tools and techniques that you can do to collaborate better, I think it goes in a long way.
Thank you all. Some really great kind of practical, concrete advice there for our current students. I'd like to turn to Erin, who is currently pursuing her PhD in sociology, as she mentioned when she introduced herself. I'm just curious to hear a little bit about how MACSS may have influenced your decision or affected your trajectory in the decision to pursue your PhD, and what kind of opportunities do you think you'll be looking for once you graduate from the program? Are you planning on staying in academia or maybe transitioning into the for-profit sector? Just any thoughts on that would be lovely.
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about my trajectory through college. I was a non-traditional student. I didn't finish college until I was like 33. And I, was working in undergraduate research, and I wanted to stay sort of in that arena, but I didn't have the skills to really get better at it because of just didn't learn that in undergrad. And I had a professor who was encouraging me to think about a PhD, but I also wasn't sure I wanted to make that huge commitment yet. So I thought, maybe a master's program, because it's lower stakes, can help me figure out if I really am ready to do a PhD, if that's what I want. And so I ended up at MACSS, thank goodness, because it did help me to see that, yes, what I wanted to do was a PhD. And one way that it prepared me was the sheer amount and intensity of work that was involved in MACSS. I don't think I would have been ready to do this much work at this intensity level for this long if it hadn't been for our program. And as far as, after graduation, I'm thinking there's a small chance I'll go to industry, but I don't think it's likely. I think I'm much more likely to stay in academia at a research center and keep doing the type of work that I'm doing now, just hopefully at a higher level and spending more time on it with no classes.
Absolutely. Thanks, Erin. We have a number of students who are interested in potentially pursuing the PhD and in making that decision. It's so helpful to hear from folks who have done the program and then kind of decided to pursue the PhD and further education. So thank you. My next question is for Rodrigo, Beth, and Dhruval. As you're all familiar with, beyond the programming and the data analysis skills, our students bring substantive skills in various social science disciplines. Rodrigo, you were kind of touching on this a little bit in your initial answer, but I'm just kind of curious, how do you see this disciplinary knowledge being useful in your field or at your particular organizations?
Okay, I can start. So, I think I can provide a couple of examples just to kind of start this topic. So I will say that one of them is, for example, one day I was working in a project related on how to design basically an app and I have taken a class of networks that is basically kind of sociology, kind of political science. And, I have all this knowledge in my mind and it was like, when somebody was proposing something, I was saying like, in my mind, I have this background and I say like, oh, I remember that I read a paper that if you do some kind of these, maybe the outcome is like this way, right? Or how people meet each other, how people is more able to interact with each other according to relationships to other people, right? So all that is it's basically, it's not analytics, it's not data science, it's not statistics. So it's something that comes from the domain field that in this case is kind of sociology. I can provide a second example. I also have some background in finance. So at some point I was in a different project when in a different company. And one of the objective was to predict the risk of users of the financial system. And with all, and basically create a prediction model for this, like which is a customer that is going to be risky. And all these, for example, you have a 1,000 variables in your data set, but also you need to have some explainability. And this explainability comes from my classes of econometrics and understanding the coefficients and discussions with Rick Evans and the seminars and analyzing the papers that at the end, it's basically my knowledge of economics. And probably I can provide a third example that is also in another project. I was trying to understand the revenue of a company, and all this is basically understanding supply and demand that basically come from my knowledge of economics. That is difficult to see for people that only have the analytics side, because they just, for example, they have programming that is summing things. But they don't understand, for example, that demand is also depending on the price, right? It's a curve, it's not that constant. And if you have that knowledge and you have very internalized, you realize that you can code something that take into account the economics background or the economics intuition that is correct, versus you just engineering kind of approach when you may get the outcome, but probably is not going to work very well if something change. So yeah, I think I'll stop here to give opportunity for others.
Anyone else want to pop in there?
Yeah, I can pop in. So how are these social science skills kind of useful in our field? That was the question, right? So I work with a lot of different people whose problems are maybe not directly social science, but they're very adjacent to it. Like we'll ask questions about how social circumstances might affect our members' health, or how we can get people to adopt healthy behaviors, right? Which are adjacent to sociology, psychology, behavioral economics, all of those fields. And I found that my experience with social science, and specifically my experience at MACSS, really helps me help those people frame their questions in a way that's actually useful and achievable using analytical methods. So that's really important. And I also think being trained in social sciences and having interacted with IRBs, having taken classes that discuss ethics in human research, that really pushes me to think about ethics and bias in a way, which is essential in my field, especially because we're working with people's healthcare. And I found that the data scientists I work with who have experience in like public health or in another social science discipline are often more engaged with those questions and also with the projects they're working on. And when you're more engaged with your projects, you often do better work. So I think social science experience is really helpful, definitely in healthcare.
Yeah, and I would like to add, like in Civis as an organization, I feel a lot of projects are geared towards like solving like social scientific issues. So I definitely felt that and my personal background was more quantitative, like I had like engineering and then heavily quant. So I really appreciated like knowing and recognizing like at least lines of thoughts or different aspects of social sciences. So and at Civis, there's a lot of people with different like social science backgrounds and applying it. So it's kind of really great because it gives you that opportunity to start that dialogue and certainly like think about the implications of your work, your data work, because ultimately we're technology solving a human problem. So the more we understand that, it really shifts your way of thinking. And I'd see that even in like my level of like even adding a feature to a dashboard, really thinking about like who's using it and how is it going to be used? What are the challenges that another country might be facing? And that really helps. So I think social science definitely opens up and broadens your perspective. And depending on the organization, it might actually be the reason like, that makes your product successful.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Leosin and JY, I'm wondering a little bit about your work in more of the nonprofit sector and what kind of opportunities you've found are available in research and data analytics outside of, the kind of for-profit industry, and if you have any recommendations as to how students might specifically prepare for those sorts of roles.
Sure, I'll start on that one. I mean, I think in the, in the nonprofit sector, there's a lot of orgs that design programs to try to intervene in systemic issues, right? Like poverty, racism, lack of access, or economic opportunity, so on and so forth. But it's always a question, not just for that organization, but for foundations or for government bodies that provide money to these organizations. Do those programs work, right? So essentially, like, program efficacy research is, I think, like a huge field of opportunity in the nonprofit sector. Another thing that I think, we should all expect to grow is, in the last 2 years, this particular moment in our society, especially after George Floyd's murder, is diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? All of these companies came out and said, okay, that happened. That was terrible and bad. So now we are committed to becoming an anti-racist organization. We are committed to improving our diversity, equity, and inclusion metrics. Okay, well, great. Well, how will you know if you're actually doing that, right? How do you know if you're meeting your goals? And so a lot of organizations have these commitments. They've set these metrics. They want to diversify their talent pool. They want to ensure that people who are advancing the organization it is more representative of folks who are who look like the people that they serve, right? And this is both like in the for-profit and the nonprofit sector. But I think there's going to be a lot of work there, or a lot of need to be able to measure the effectiveness of those types of policies and those types of programs. And I think that's a really nascent field. And obviously that's at the forefront of a lot of folks' mind and a lot of companies' minds, especially in the last 2 years. So I think, thinking creatively about, what are the issues that are most salient right now are some things that I would point to.
Yeah, I would concur with everything JY said. I think especially in the not-for-profit sector, many of them have been very focused on, what JY said about having the social impact and actually doing a lot of the groundwork with community issues, and a lot of them are just recently thinking about how to measure them. So I definitely agree with that. One thing I add is it's kind of a throwback to Beth and Rodrigo's point in the previous on the previous question about blending in knowledge from different disciplines. So in the not-for-profit sector, I can speak to just kind of the organizations that I've worked with, but a lot of them are looking for folks who also have exposure to, especially to issues they're working with. So even if you are a data analyst or a data scientist, one important thing to do is to try and get yourself some exposure to either like the theory of the social issues that you imagine yourself working with, or even like volunteering with some organizations on the ground. And I would say that's a good way to prepare for this sector as a whole.
If I could just add one thing to what Leo had just said, is a lot of these nonprofit organizations, right, they have very strong like mission and values. And so being able to articulate, why does this company's or this organization's values resonate with me, and have a very compelling answer for that, I guarantee you will come up in an interview, either for an internship or for a job.
Absolutely. That's really great advice about how to kind of approach your preparation for applying to one of those types of positions. Thank you both. My next question is for Aaron and Jake, and I'm kind of wondering about the balance of qualitative and quantitative skills in practice. MACSS is obviously a quant-oriented program, but how have you both seen these kind of two skill sets come into play in your careers and in your research thus far?
I can start. No, I'm sorry, Aaron, you go ahead. You unmuted. Okay. I think in the field of data science in industry that I've seen, It's more that I can give you cautionary tales of what happens when you don't take into account both the qualitative and the quantitative. I think a lot of times there's a temptation for companies to think data science is it's magic. You hire some wizards, you give them a problem, and they figure it out. That's great. That's great branding for data science, which is awesome. I like that. But the problem is when the problem isn't well enough defined, and if you just jump in and try to solve it, you're going to have a bad time. So I'll give a more concrete example. So at my company, one of our big initiatives for 2022 is promoting healthy choices for food. That's awesome. What does that mean? How does my team actually attack that? What does it even mean to eat healthy? What are healthy choices? You're going to get different opinions from different people about what is healthy, what their goals are, and how we can support them in achieving them. I can't have my team go build a bunch of cool machine learning models until we know better what we're actually trying to address. And so we do have a couple teams typically that we'll work with. Sometimes we'll work with our user experience folks, who are the folks who will go out and do qualitative interviews with customers, try to understand these things. And then we'll be working with our product teams to really understand and refine the problem. And this is where I think it was Bethany said earlier, sometimes you have to explain what data science can't do. So we have a lot of those discussions, which are always fun. But I think it's really about how do you make sure you're not neglecting one or the other. I'm a pretty quant heavy person, that's my bias, but you can't just give a data scientist a bunch of data and expect an answer to come out the other end without some better definition.
I agree with Jake. You know, to give a quick example, say if I'm studying an anti-violence intervention and I want to see whether it reduces, you know, gunshot injuries, and you know, I code up a model, put the data in, and out the other side comes that yes, it reduces gunshot violence. But why? Is it educational support? Is it income support? Is it job training? I can't tell you why, because all of those things are lumped together in street outreach or intervention. So for that, you need a qualitative team to go out and do the interviews and do the focus groups and talk to the professionals who are doing this intervention to try to put the pieces together and find out, you know, what are the key elements of this intervention that are causing this successful decrease in violence. You know, in terms of all of that type of qualitative research that I just said, it is happening. I am not the one who's doing it. I took notes at a focus group one time, and that has been the extent of my involvement. But there are teams of people who are doing this. So I've had the opportunity to see my colleagues present on their work and hear about how they interact with the, you know, folks who work for these organizations and when they speak to the clients of these organizations. I did take a class on interview methods, and I tentatively have an interview project planned for the future, but it would be this sort of mixed methods, hybrid computational interview project that would have a computational text analysis component in addition to traditional interview methods. I don't really see myself moving into qualitative work. I just don't think it's ever going to be the main part of my work because my history, I mean, obviously I went to MACSS, so all quant all the time, which is fine with me because it's what I like. But I agree with Jake, you know, qualitative research is really important. Sometimes in sociology, there's this perception that there's like a fight between quantitative and qualitative methodologists, where, you know, one is perceived to be better and the other one is like, and people have different perceptions of which one is better. But I think that it's a false dichotomy, and it's unfair and bad for knowledge production. So I'm not saying we should all be qualitative scholars, but I'm saying there should be qualitative scholars. And I think it's our responsibility as researchers to partner with them when it makes sense to, when we can, to try to get better answers to questions. Then yes, it works. No, it doesn't work. Okay, but why? And, you know, data science can't always answer that. So that's where qualitative research sometimes comes in.
Absolutely. Thank you both. I'm going to ask one last question and then we're going to move on to Q&A. So my last question is for the international folks on the panel. As you may or may not know, we have a really large international student population in the MACSS program. I'm wondering if there's any advice that you'd share with our international student population about finding a job in the US. Anyone can jump in.
I will say, I mean, I have probably three different tips that I can share. Like the first one is to understand the process. And when I say understand the process, it means basically talking with a lot of people that has worked in the American companies and understand what they are looking for. I think at some point I thought that I knew what was a recruiting process, but I didn't knew. I think there are a lot of formal, informal rules that you need to be aware of. And I think the only way that you can learn this is talking with people, learning blogs, reading, I mean, like learning from your peers, talking with other people that had interviews. What I think is something that we just assume that we know, but at least in my case, I think I was not aware of all the informal and formal rules of the interview process in the US. And one of the items related to this is, for example, that your resume should be in let's say, in the American way, it should be in the perfect English. You should ask for advice and you should ask for reviews to native speakers. In fact, in this call, I have 3 of my reviewers that were Shelly and UI and also Erin. So all of them helped me to actually give me different points of view and basically to put it in a way that it's like the perfect English and that is basically something that I can call the American resume. And networking, of course, get referrals, understand the different industries, and basically come to the interview very well prepared. I mean, the second one is that the OPT is very flexible. So I think take advantage of that. Sometimes, basically you can try to go, for example, in steps, right? I mean, I think this is related to my third point, that is basically you can go in different steps to the North Star. I think it's very difficult to actually change in very significant way in professional career, right? For example, if in my case, right? For example, I mean, in my background is in economics, I did MACSS. So basically for a recruiter is someone that knows how to code and knows something about economics. And if I wanted to be directly in tech, will be more difficult than if I do what I have done. That is basically first I go to consulting when they value a lot the knowledge of economics, and they also value coding, and then I can jump into tech, right? So I think for many of you this can be the case. So don't I mean, if it's difficult to do the jump to the North Star, to whatever you want to go, so you can do different steps, like if those steps are in the way to the North Star or to the perfect job that you would like. I think just to finalize, I will say that there is a lot of demand for data scientists and this kind of skills. So it's just a matching problem, and sometimes it will take time, but just be patient, and I'm sure that you will have the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for those thoughtful answers to the questions. I certainly have been taking notes and learning a lot. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Shelly and see what kind of questions we have from our students.
Sure, thank you so much. So we do have about 4 or 5 questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and open them up to the group, and if you have an answer, feel free to just jump in. I would say to our attendees, if we don't get to your question, save it, because you'll be able to talk in the networking session one-on-one or in a small group and still get that question answered. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, the great part about the webinar today is that we have the opportunity to vote up all of these questions. So about 7 students have asked, do you have any advice? We know that finding first full-time jobs can be challenging for a new grad. Do you have any specific advice for us? Also, when I talked to HR, I found many full-time openings that are immediate hiring positions. In other words, that HR wants you to start in a month. The concern is that if they wait, until a month before they graduate that they won't find a position. They just find that to be too risky. So as someone who is, getting ready, who graduated recently, who've been on the job market, can you talk a little bit about advice you have for the job search process coming close to graduation? When's the best time? How did you find your success as you transitioned? How did you navigate this space of uncertainty with these immediate hire positions versus these programs that may be hired far ahead in the future, like a management consulting firm? Who'd like to start?
I can start. So a couple things here. One, informational interviewing is really, really good. If you're not sure what industry you want to be in, like talk to people. I'm sure most of the people on this call would be happy with you reaching out to learn more about our fields or connect you with people in adjacent fields. Do that, and that can sometimes lead to job opportunities. It led to a job opportunity for me. If you see a position that's posted that's supposed to be starting in a month, that shouldn't stop you from applying. If they really like you, they might hold it. And even if they don't end up going with you, you get that valuable experience interviewing, which is really important. Like you might go through a code. I see another question is about going through like a code assessment, but even just having that conversation with people and getting used to that, super essential. So yeah, I'd recommend informational interviewing, and don't be afraid to apply to jobs that you think you either aren't a great candidate for or are starting too soon.
Who else would like to add to that?
I could add to it a little bit from the hiring side. I'm definitely not a recent grad. Interviewing is a skill, and like any other skill, you just need repetition. Your first couple of interviews are probably going to be terrible. That's okay. So you shouldn't stress out too much about finding the perfect job to apply to. Get those terrible interviews out of the way first. Or maybe you'll be surprised and maybe you'll find that it's actually a company you are very interested in and you did nail the interview. So I would say don't limit yourself. I've been surprised by companies that I didn't think were going to be very interesting that I liked a lot when I got into the interview process, and vice versa. In terms of the timing thing, I don't think a lot of companies are going to hold it against you if you say, I'm graduating in May and I don't want to start until then. Especially hiring for entry-level positions, that should be expected. I don't want to say it's a red flag if somebody doesn't want to wait. I would think it's a little bit strange. I think people should be used to hiring people who are graduating in a certain time. But yeah, just get repetitions and network. Go through LinkedIn, talk to people you know. If you can find a connection to someone at the company, ask them for a 15-minute chat. Most people are going to say yes. And best case scenario, that person hands your resume right to the recruiter and you've just gotten out of the slush pile and you're having your first screening interview. So, be your own advocate that way and just practice, and don't be afraid to fail, because it's going to take a lot of failures to get there.
Great. I'm going to add to that just real quickly. So there are a lot of positions out there that are immediate hire positions, and the life cycle of a job is about 8 to 12 weeks. So positions that are posted today, if it is not a position that's hired in the masses, if it's a one-off, two-off type of position, chances are they're going to want to hire within the next 8 to 12 weeks. That's why spring quarter is beautiful for starting your job search. If you are an international student, sometimes that's held up a little bit because of the fact that obviously you're waiting for your OPT approval. But spring is just really the perfect time for most people to start their job search. You fall into that sweet spot of, by the time they actually start the interviews and the offers, most people will be willing to wait for you for 4 to 8 weeks, but not much further than that. They're not going to hire you in February and wait until September for you to start in many cases. So that's why spring is really a nice time for you. Moving on to our next question. There's questions about internships, and can you talk a little bit more about the relationship between internships and full-time employment post-graduation? Should I be looking for internships with a company I'd like to work with later, or an internship which allows me experience for the role that I'd eventually like to get? How many of you had internships when you were in the program? Did that help you? Go ahead, Rodrigo.
Yeah, I think there is not a strict rule for this. I think, you know, in general, if you can get an internship during the first year in the company you may like to work, I think that's ideal. But I think otherwise, you know, if you don't get it or you don't have time or something, you know, I think, you know, anyway, there is demand and you can get other opportunity after you graduated. So I would say that it is helpful, of course, you know, in the industry or in the company you would like to work. That should be perfect if you can do during the first year. But if you don't get it, I think it's not a reason to be stressed out.
Anybody like to add that? Any other advice on internships?
I'll say something real quick for prospective PhD students. So I interned at a research lab at U Chicago in the summer between first and second year. And that was a really great experience because I got to practice programming and work on a project. And then I TA'd with the professor who heads the research lab, and he was my thesis advisor, and he wrote me a recommendation for my PhD programs. And one of the other research directors in the program wrote my other letter. So it was a very good move to take that internship because it really helped me get where I am. So I would recommend, if you have the opportunity to intern with somebody who can advocate for you when it comes to your PhD applications, that's a great thing to do.
Jake, you're the person who has the most experience on the panel. So I'm just curious, you know, what advice do you have in regards to internships?
Yeah, it's an interesting, you know, when you're trying to get hired for your first position, if you stand out, certainly getting an internship place where you need to work, you already know people there. You already back on anything that might come up. But experience anywhere else in this, and having that on your resume can make a big difference. Post the data science job opening entry level, you're going to get hundreds of applicants. So how do you get through those? So having sort of experience in a company setting, putting code into production, dramatically 5% resumes. So I don't think it's necessary, but I think it helps. That's to them.
Jake, we're having a little bit of issue with your microphone. I think we probably got only about every other word. So that question may come up in your networking session. So everybody, thank you so much. There are a couple other questions in the chat. They deal with course registration and courses that you would recommend. So that may come up in your networking session. There is also some additional questions about coding and technical assessments. And this is something that, I mean, truthfully, I would love to hear all the answers to. So I know that we promised a break, so I am going to go ahead and we'll wrap this up and we'll be rejoining. I'm going to really quickly share a screen for those of you that would like to join us for the networking. Again, you'll have the opportunity to get into some private rooms and small groups and ask some more of your questions. So if you wanted to take note of the meeting ID and the passcode, we'll also drop it in the chat. Lauren, were you able to drop that into the chat for them?
I just did, Shelley.
Perfect, wonderful. So if you want to go ahead and grab the link from the chat, that would be wonderful. We'll leave the session open for just a second so people can grab it. But thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. We will be back in 5 minutes into our breakout sessions under the new link.